This is the Digital Trust Podcast. In every episode, we strive to bring support to those of you who serve on the front lines and in the trenches of data and technology. We endeavor to bring understanding to the under-resourced and underappreciated, help remove your stress, and provide relief to your pain. Welcome to the Digital Trust Podcast. Sit down with us as we give you hard-hitting advisory conversations to help you build digital trust with your stakeholders and clients, and actionable takeaways to help you become a digitally trustworthy organization.
Welcome once again to the Digital Trust Podcast. I am excited to introduce you to our next guest. It is none other than Derek Collins, all the way from Boston, Massachusetts, home of the Boston Bruins, the Boston Celtics, who you may have heard of in the news recently, and the New England Patriots, I believe, as well. So a very sporty and winning record town. And Derek happens also to be the VP of Channel Sales for Thrive. So Derek, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Very, very excited to be here and have a great conversation.
Awesome. It's good to see you again. And what I'm hoping to do today is really reach out to and speak to the IT people, IT departments, sysadmins, IT leaders, and just talk about their dilemmas and their circumstances, what's on their plate. So let's start with that. Let's talk about the stresses of, people in IT, managed service provider environments, or in IT departments, or maybe one-man band IT departments. What are their main stresses that you see?
The industry's come a long way over the past, 20 years, which is really when I started back in, the early 2000s. You could really manage a typical environment and kind of be a jack of all trades, more of a generalist from an IT perspective. That's certainly changed over the course of the past 20 some odd years, particularly this day and age, right? The threats, the amount of complexity, remote access from your user, new applications and demands. You really need to be kind of specialists in your particular field. So the stress and demand, I think, is keeping up with the technology, the trends, and understanding how to positively impact that organization and that user community in a way that makes sense, knowing that you really can't be an expert on every single thing that your organization will need. Know how to facilitate, manage, and coordinate the overall outcome of that result. So really become management of that output, and then understand how to leverage the right tools, partners, platforms, and resources to, find a field that you're really comfortable with and excel in, and then have your network of your peers to really lean on. The IT folks that I work with day in, day out, they really value their peer groups and their networks, because that's essentially how they stay ahead of the game and understand their trends and kind of what to watch out for and kind of what's working, right? What does good look like, and what's not working? What are the pitfalls that they should avoid? So I think just staying ahead of it and knowing that there's not enough hours in the day to do the basic job, and then all the new things that come in, it's not always a rewarded in terms of press or publicity. Gonna make the joke. It's the referee in the professional world. You really notice them when they made a bad call or something bad happened. Yes. When in reality, right, they're doing that job day in, day out, and they don't get their praises sung nearly enough.
100%. I think of them maybe like a sound man at an event as well. They're not really noticed. It's not like everyone's looking at the sound man when the band is performing.
Exactly.
If something goes wrong, all eyes.
You're going to notice.
Eyes at the back table, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, speaking of the perceptions of IT people, I'm thinking about it internally and externally as well. What are some of the maybe common misconceptions, or maybe lesser known misconceptions or myths about IT people?
Kind of back to my earlier point, right? It's certainly evolved over the years. I think the old myth of IT is that they can fix any problem, and no matter, for that end user, right? It could be their mouse broke, or they can't put toner in the printer. It could be some basic things, and just because you work in IT doesn't necessarily mean that that's your job to fix. A lot of the IT folks I work with are executive level, as savvy as you find in any industry, really leaders in that space. Not now that you have, advisory councils and CISOs, CIOs, right? The titles that exist today didn't exist before. You certainly still need, and those level one break fix folks for any given thing, but it's come a long way. So I think the old myth of kind of IT folks just they're there to fix my issue is really, no, they're there to really transform that organization, take you to that future, have a vision to execute, and then once again put the pieces in place to help execute that, and then build consensus internally across that organization. That's one of the harder things I see IT struggle with, is that kind of executive sponsorship and that consensus internally, right? Cross department, access, and from the top down, being able to have that vision and then execute it across and value that.
Derek, that makes me think of the budget discussion, right? Because there's an IT roadmap, there's a vision, there's improving the tech stack, supporting business processes. What does the budget discussion look like in these cases?
More often than not, IT is rolling up to the CFO, and so the chief financial officer, will obviously hold the purse strings in terms of what makes sense from a budget perspective. There are some simple trends and standards that you can apply just as a rule of thumb, right? Maybe you spend 10% of your revenue on your IT spend. Now that can be everything from your applications to your staffing to your tooling and platforming. That percent is certainly going to fluctuate depending on industry, right? Manufacturing, a little bit lower. Financial services and healthcare, which I work a great deal in. Higher spend typically, right? More regulation, more compliance, more demands that you really have to invest in. So, but I think understanding where you are today in that baseline, and usually you might be coming from a place where your spend could be 2% or 3%, where your peers might be, double or even triple that spend. And what does that mean for that user community and that group and that access, right? And it's going to mean they're going to have more tools, more capability to leverage, which will attract better talent, retain that talent, attract bigger, better clientele, and then put you in a position to really bid on projects and execute on those. So really looking at IT from that perspective, and the budget spend. I know certainly when you look at security, and that's an additive budget item, right? Didn't really exist 5 or 10 years ago. Just wasn't there. So a lot of the time, I'm helping.
Are they always excited about that? Adding a new budget item for something that they may not have a background in?
Only when they had an event that they can look towards and say, oh, no, I understand why that's important. When that doesn't exist, you really have to take the time, slow it down, and help them understand some of the baselines, right? Here's kind of here are the minimum things that you should be doing. And here's really, what the ideal things that you should be doing. Maybe there's some place in the middle that makes sense. So the words I use: right sizing budget, right sizing solutions to where you are. Just because your peers are doing it doesn't mean that you need to or should be doing it, but doing more than what you have done in the past, just because that's the way it was, is, we're constantly battling against the history and context that came before. But CFOs will really understand that, and it's really the IT department's job to convey that, which is where we really help convey and articulate that messaging and provide the content and use cases on why it might make sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much I want to get to with you, Derek, and so little time to do it. Let's switch gears for a minute and look at managed service providers. So maybe we're talking to organizations that need a managed service provider in the first place. So there's the selection. Or then you're considering switching MSPs because there's a red flag. Maybe you're an IT guy in a company and you need some help with an MSP. So I want to just talk about the pain around that, which is the selection, the red flags that you see, and then the actual pain of making the switch from in some cases, I hate to say it, the devil you know versus the devil that you don't know. And is it even worth it, right? Or are
Yeah,
good ones
yeah.
even out there maybe in your mind, right? Are you skeptical?
It's doing this long enough, I've become a grizzled veteran, as I say. You've seen it before. You're certainly going to see it again, and you're 1,000% correct, right? The devil, I think it's a stat. It's probably a few years old now, but around three-quarters of operations will not make that plunge to change. Right, the fear of the unknown, the cost of the transition, and maybe the pain for what they're experiencing today is not at a point where they really feel that makes sense. So, is it the right time? Timing really does matter. Where you have that consensus, and sometimes it's momentum building, right? Do you have the momentum behind you where you can really get that adoption? I was working with a customer the other day where they just have tech debt after years and years of not really having a partner that was being proactive in the recommendations, but now they have to deal with everything at the same time, right? And and that can be a lot for any organization. So knowing kind of when the right time is, uh, avoiding the analysis paralysis situation, which I
Yeah.
see that all the time. When you're bringing in 9 to 10 different suppliers and vendors to compare and contrast, the amount of time it takes just to look at three is so intense. I mean, just a sales cycle on a new customer can take 6 months. On average, you're probably at 4 months, give or take. So it's not something that happens overnight. Multiple meetings, analysis, discovery sessions. So you really have to be serious about it. Just the amount of time it takes from an IT person's perspective to work with that new partners, right? As they're usually looking at least a few different options to bring in. You have to really know, hey, the juice is really worth the squeeze here.
Hmm.
Maybe they make no decision, or maybe they bring in the incumbent to bid in that same cycle. But it's just like buying a house. If you haven't bought a house in 20 years, spend some time to understand where the market is today and what's the process look like. How do you put in an offer? What are the things you got to watch out for? Same thing when you're exploring new MSPs out there, particularly if you've been with the same one for an extended period of time, which is very common. With them for 10 years, maybe you outgrew them, or they got bought and things changed, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So take the time to really understand that process, and then build that consensus once again, so that when it feels right, you see somebody that's taken the right steps, you've vetted the organization, you've talked to the right people, you have the contracts and the SLAs and all the things that really matter. Then you get to a point where you have a comfort level, which is really, really important in this space.
Yeah, and I'm seeing like a really key issue here for organizations that consider switching. I think a big pain point is my IT service provider is not very proactive.
Mhm.
They're not really leading us. They're more just kind of break fix, keeping the lights on, and that's really it. And they're looking for more from their MSP, more on the strategy and roadmap level. Are you
Yep.
seeing kind of the same thing?
Yeah, I'd say any when folks get to a point where they're really looking for something new, something better, right? Usually it's something more mature, more proactive, more strategic. Typically, they're coming from a place where, that example I just gave, the MSP they were with for 10 years. They had a handshake agreement from literally 10 to 15 years ago. But nobody was making recommendations on the future. Nobody was really looking at the roadmap and saying, all right, where should we be? Whether they say yes or no to any given initiative, it's helped them understand, here's what you should be looking at, right? Here's what you can leverage with the cloud. Here's how we can re-architect what you're doing, and improve your user experience, and help you with your billable hours, and whatever the case is in that particular organization. So strategic, lack of strategic direction, lack of proactive. They're usually reactive in that space, and then usually they have to be noisy to get a level of service that they feel they need. Right. So that just means you need more time and effort to raise the alarm and get the folks engaged to know, hey, I'm about to exit this contract unless you guys really step up and show me that you're taking this seriously. And they'll usually put some effort in for a period of time, and then that goes back to being stale. You go through that process enough where you get to a point where, hey, nothing really fundamental is changing. Okay, maybe that's when you start looking at those kind of signals.
Awesome. Well, one last question, Derek, because we are basically out of time here. Maybe there's some IT folks out there who are finding themselves in need of some help. Maybe they're looking for somebody to come in and help them augment what they're doing. When does it make sense for such an organization, such a person, to consider a co-managed solution? What is an ideal candidate for a co-managed, and what does that scenario look like, co-managed IT?
I think more often than not, the most common scenario I'm seeing today is a co-managed platform. Every organization out there can buy 1,000 different platforms and tools, right? But then you have to manage it, you have to staff it, you have to train it. If you lose staff that was expert on that, you have to replace that. So you start opening yourself up to gaps and silos within that environment. So finding a provider that can do multiple things for you, they don't have to do everything, but find things that are really critical, that they're really good at, right? Where are the gaps? Is it off-hour support? Is it security? Is it cloud expertise? A lot of smaller, I think there's 30,000 MSPs just in the States alone. 97% of them are under 20 employees, right? Under $1 million in actual, EBITDA. They're not really driving that level of specialization. So find out where your gaps are, find out where you need that expertise, and then find a platform in a provider that can orchestrate your overall IT outputs, right? What are the results that I need, either from a security posture, from patch management, end user support, cloud, and Microsoft technologies, and make sure that you have the access that you need, knowing that provider will certainly have the access and the capability to support that environment. That does not mean that 20 years ago these were replacing jobs. It was either I outsource or I do everything insourced, and there was really no kind of blend in between. Now it's you need partners to come in to help and augment, not just offload elements. And that's really where you start looking at the responsibility profile, kind of like a RACI chart. You look at your overall matrix and things that you're responsible for, things that you bring in somebody to help just as a contractor, and you're looking at this overall project. What are the things that I really want some expertise in? That's where you design that program, and finding a partner that has the depth and the breadth, and then the scale, where they've done it before, they work with similar organizations. You can actually see the platforms, get your hands on it, get comfortable with it, talk to the folks that would be involved in that situation. That's really where I think the industry has gone and will continue to go, to find that kind of balance of running your environment. You have your staff, but then you're leveraging the machinery and the engine of a large managed service provider, security provider, cloud provider, to make your folks and team more effective. You give them opportunity for advancement, for education, for training and collaboration with these groups, and typically you have a much more stronger end result for the overall organization, and job security, quite frankly, because if there are issues, it's not just all on you. It is now on, you have other folks in here doing some things where at the very least, it spreads out that the consequences of things that could go wrong. Ideally, you avoid that with the proper program.
I love it. It sounds like a great option, and I think it's likely, from what I'm seeing and hearing, the way of the future, that co-managed model. So that's awesome. Derek, thanks for sharing your wisdom about IT, sharing your experience with us. And a special thank you to our viewers and listeners as well for tuning in here to this conversation. We will see you on the next episode of the Digital Trust Podcast.
Thanks for joining us today on the Digital Trust Podcast. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with someone you care about. And if you'd like to receive our monthly newsletter, please click the link in the description to subscribe. And to put your mind at ease, our newsletter will include episode summaries with key points and actionable takeaways, plus a heads up on the upcoming episode guests. Rest assured, it won't be a spammy sales message, and we will never sell or share your information. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode.